Welcome back to the Encounter Faith Podcast, everybody. My name is Ross, and I have the privilege of having these conversations each and every week. And today I'm joined by somebody named Michael Bradburn. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, great to be here, Ross. Thanks for inviting me to be on your podcast.
Yeah, of course. So Michael is part of an organization called Samaracare, which he's going to talk about in a second. It's an organization that those of you who are around Good Shepherd know well through our care ministry, which we'll also highlight. But also, I think it's important for folks to understand kind of the scope of what y'all do, Michael, because you have a very wide portfolio. So can you help people understand just the nature of the work you do and how it intersects with churches like Good Shepherd?
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about that, Ross. So we started in 1971, and it was three different churches in Naperville that had the idea of offering pastoral counseling. So the opportunity for people to get support, counseling support with the spiritual integration and pastoral aspect and bringing in their faith into that. So that was way back in 71, half-time person. Over the years, continue to grow and expand, have partnerships with Good Shepherd and other congregations in Naperville and surrounding areas, and really consider ourselves an arm of congregations where we can offer the kind of care that people might need a bit on a longer term basis. So maybe the pastor at the congregation could see a couple or a family once or twice and things like that, but to have the ongoing care that some could need, we're able to provide that. So over the years, we've really expanded what we're able to do. So we have child and adolescent psychologists and counselors, and we have people that work with older adults and everywhere in between. So we literally see people 2 to 92, and we
Nice.
have focus on different things like autism. We have a big area that team that works on folks who are on the spectrum and families. We have ADD, of course, ADHD, and so forth, depression, anxiety, so grief, a lot of different challenges, existential questions and challenges that we help folks navigate and walk with. So it's a really vibrant community of people who are caring to the community and are trained to specifically help with, mental health challenges, issues, some medical, because we do have medical doctors for psychiatry, and looking at that holistic approach to being able to care for a person, so mind, body, spirit, community, and really have a focus on what makes us unique. I would say it's two things. One is that spiritual integration focus and training. So folks
Mhm.
like myself have, background in that in terms of a pastoral background, master divinity, and all that good stuff. And then we have a few subsidy programs. So we want to serve all people. Some have regular commercial insurance, some have Medicare, and some are between things or insurance or have a huge deductible, and we're able to work with people and we raise money, and that's help, part of what Good Shepherd does is help support that mental health access program, we call it, which is essentially our fee subsidy program.
Yeah. One of my favorite things about you guys both is the highly local context. You're right here in Naperville, and as a majority of the folks who listen to this are. But if you're not one of those people, I do hope you keep listening, because one of the things that I think Samaracare does, and Michael just touched on, is the wide variety of the both kinds of support and the types of support that they offer. The distinction I'm drawing there is, as Michael said, 2 to 92, but also the variety of challenges that folks might be bringing to your organization, and how you have tools and resources to help anybody, anywhere, at any time. One of the things that stands out to me that is important for us to jump into, you mentioned the grief groups. This is probably the thing that folks around Good Shepherd are most familiar with. But I also know that there's folks who even are here who don't know that this is something you guys do and do so well. Can you help folks understand what the grief groups are, what the role of Samaracare is with those, but also what the role of the local churches like Good Shepherd?
Sure. So the grief groups are supported by congregations. So, in other words, financially supported and then promoted within the congregation. So a person who goes to the group just comes, signs up and they go, and there's no cost to them. And typically, a person who would come in would be somebody who has a death loss, so a spouse, friend, and so forth. And they would, the facilitators are both right now ordained pastors, so they have a very strong pastoral presence and
Mm,
integrate in the pastoral, and they're also able to use some things that are more advanced training related to maybe psychology and some things like that. So they're able to go through and walk with people in a group context. So some people come in for regular individual counseling around grief, but this is a way to be with others who are having similar experiences and processing grief and getting support through that grief from the facilitator, but also from the peers that are in the group together. So it's a really strong program supported by congregations, and most of the folks we get who go, come from different congregations. And there's, an online opportunity there, so it's pretty accessible to people to
Hmm.
go. So people in Naperville or people spread out a little farther even.
Yeah. What I like about the how that ministry plays out here at Good Shepherd is it also draws from folks who otherwise wouldn't walk into the church. And I think about the kind of services that that group's able to provide, it's really the church at its best,
Mhm.
where we are an organization that is uniquely equipped and therefore has the unique responsibility to show up for people in those particular
Mhm.
moments of need, in
Mhm.
those where things kind of like seem darkest. And I know, at least in the context of Good Shepherd, we're able to have lots of folks who have benefited from the program that help facilitate the program. And there's ways in which, even if you are someone who has not recently experienced the kind of grief that Michael is describing, odds are, because you're a person in 2026, dear listener, you probably have at some point in your life. And I would hope that you, as you learn more about it by checking out the links in the show notes, that you might decide that you're going to serve and give back some of your time, energy, resources, and take something that you have processed well and maybe benefited from some of the services at Samaracare even to help those who are currently navigating seasons like that. But that's not actually really why we're here. One of the things that I think is also helpful for folks to understand is this is the kind of work you guys do every day at this sort of intersection between mental health services and faith services helps highlight that I believe even calling it an intersection is a little bit of a false choice. You're someone who personally you have an MDiv and you're working in a counseling organization, to put a very broad label to it. How have you navigated the way that the church talks about mental health, the way that you have seen that lived out in your professional life? Because I think society, we may have moved on from some of the stigma conversation, but I also think it's helpful for folks to understand that like that's something that has a really long tail. That you're seeing folks
Mhm.
who still carry that stigma, even if we've culturally said, "Hey, we don't need to have the stigma anymore." Like it's still there in a lot of that care scenarios.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. There's been a lot of work on the stigma issue, and more, folks are open to coming, getting support, and there's definitely been a lot of strides with that through efforts of counseling organizations like ours, and definitely at the national level with celebrities or athletes coming forward and talking about their own journeys and
Sure.
normalizing it and so forth. So my training, is the background in pastoral care and counseling, right? So, in my training with that, and the social work had a lot of traditional counseling things that were more out of psychology. I didn't personally have a lot of adversarial feedback or training like I hear colleagues have. So,
Sure.
historically, in psychology programs, the programs are not really open to faith communities or
Mhm.
relationship with God and that healing. There's a bit of a um, adversarial kind of view historically, right? So I
Mhm.
personally didn't have that, and I think I really sought out probably training that integrated that and had that, way back. There's a lot more research now from full on psychologists where it's, the whole evidence-based thing now is showing the healing components of having that spiritual integration. A lot
Mhm.
of studies have shown things that many people in faith communities and pastoral counselors have known for years and seen really positive healing and results. It's become more and more researched and accepted now that the spiritual and the community aspect and faith support, how important that can be to healing. So it's been interesting to see over the years that shifting and changing. And Samaracare, is a pretty early adopter and leader in that area actually over the years.
Yeah, one of the things that stands out to me is you've been at this for, around 15 plus years, and there's folks who are listening who have seen the conversation play out. The most common example is it's different for them than it was for their kids or their grandkids, certainly.
Hmm.
One of the things that I'm curious about is for those folks who maybe carry some of that, um, I'll use the phrase uh, misunderstanding, because as you said, like the evidence is pretty clear, and it was always something that folks who engaged in this work that you did, it was pretty clear to those who were doing the work, but the took a while for the rest of us to catch up. How do you help well, let's just say the example of the grandparent understand that the conversation on mental health today in the church is actually beneficial to their grandkid?
Hmm.
Because I think there's a ways in which that adversarial relationship you're talking about went both ways. How do you help
Yeah,
kind of bridge
good
that
point.
gap before
Yeah.
care can happen?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's an interesting idea that maybe before the grandparents would have had, this is going to be like said and not, this doesn't apply to everybody. It's, a bit
Yeah,
dramatic,
this
but
purely a
you,
hypothetical. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
like,
Please don't cut this and put it out. We're all the qualifications aside.
yeah, that, maybe like, hey, just, God has a plan. Let's just
Mm-hmm.
pray about it, almost too far that way and kind of
Mm-hmm.
not needing psychology or counseling type stuff. And then on the other hand, maybe like, hey, you need this science stuff, and that other stuff is, hokey over there. So there was back and forth a bit, sort of to show, that having both is possible and really powerful to have a strong and growing, exploring faith and whether wherever a person is on that journey, and then getting some ideas that come out of good, the best practices related to counseling and integrating those together is super amazing in terms of the outcomes that can happen with that. And I
Yeah.
think it is through maybe people seeing the impact that has, maybe explaining it to some degree, but I think actually seeing some results where a grandparent could see their grandchild in therapy, especially in our case, if there's some integration part, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I can see the benefits. They're doing better in school, they're doing better, they feel more comfortable in social settings or whatever the stuff they're struggling with, and that the place respects faith and is integrating that in as appropriate. So
Yeah. I think it's one of the strong part of my strong recommendation around you guys is that you're engaging in this work without pretense, because I have a lot of compassion for folks who grew up with this as a stigma or believe that this is something that is adversarial to a relationship with Jesus,
mhm.
because you were told that over and over and over and over and over again. Sometimes not explicitly, but unfortunately, sometimes even explicitly. You use the example of you just need to pray about it more. And what I want to give those kinds of folks permission for is to go, yeah, it is a different world now. Although it is human to go, different means bad. In this case, it is a very strong example, one of the chief examples in my life where different means good. Because
Mhm.
I know
Mhm.
that in the different seasons of my life where I've had regular interactions with pastors, regular interactions with counselors, regular interactions with psychologists, what I was getting out of those three kinds of relationships was unique. And I think too often folks forget the kind of frontline role that the church has in coming alongside folks who are dealing with any sort of mental health challenge. So you can, my encouragement, dear listener, is you can ignore this conversation, but I believe, especially in 2026, it is critically important that the church actually leans into moments like this rather than leaning out. And to go back to something earlier that you talked about when it comes to stuff like anxiety support, ADHD support, things that are more the practical day to day life of folks in 2026, what kind of can folks expect if they are facing those challenges? What can they expect from working with an organization like Samaracare?
Sure. So they can expect to be really respected, to be listened to. The pace is a reasonable pace, and what I mean by that is the psychiatrists, psych NP counselors are going to listen, and then help the person not quickly like jump in too fast with do this or do that. It's going to be at the person's pace, but leaning toward gentle and listening and a little bit longer view in terms of the healing that can be taking place. So they can expect being respected for who they are, what they're coming in with, the non-judgmental, and if they want to talk about challenges with their relationship with people, God, or how things are going well, like that everything's available to be talked about and processed, so there's nothing off limits to have a safe place to do that, a confidential place,
Hmm.
with trained, caring people that will help and whatever the person's bringing in, whatever challenge and whatever struggles they're having.
Yeah. I think it's helpful to kind of, you hear sometimes words like wraparound services. And I think it's helpful for folks to understand the ways in which an organization like Samaracare exists to meet you where you're at and therefore decrease the burden of you having to show up in any of these environments, any of these spaces where Samaracare is doing great work with any level of expectation. The invitation is for you to come to participate. But by doing so, you're stepping into an environment where you will be cared for, you'll be listened to, you'll be heard. I love it. That's where you started. I also know that one of the things you guys do, which I think is really helpful, is you do a lot of spiritual direction and you work even with folks
Mhm.
who are in leadership positions or folks who are pastors or in the context of the church and just help by providing those kinds of folks care, space, things to listen to. Can
Mhm.
you help people understand that sort of arm of what Samaracare does?
Mhm. Yeah, one of the things that we really enjoy, and I know I personally do, is working with pastors or religious leaders, knowing firsthand, because I worked, as a pastor in a congregation. Now I have a specialized call to hear. Um, so I think I have a lot of credibility. They see, oh, he knows what it's like to be in that role. So that's
Mm-hmm.
already a starting point. And then supporting pastors. So myself and others do um, a lot of care for pastors and other religious leaders, and have the unique training background um, and credibility with those folks. So um, we're able to do, a couple things. So whether it's counseling, pastoral counseling or regular counseling, I'll just call it spiritual integrated with pastors. We also
Mm-hmm.
do a lot of clergy coaching. So it gives because being a clergy can be very an isolated position. So to have support,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's counseling support, coaching support, looking at goals and challenges in the congregation and having support related to that in terms of coaching. And then we also do spiritual direction for pastors, but also for lay people. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
way to have care for one's own soul and to get, um, uh, have that director be on a journey with the person. And all those are, distinct in terms of the counseling, coaching, and spiritual direction. Are they all helping the person on their journey? Yes. Is there some overlap? Potentially, yes. But they're unique in different ways, and we really value offering those services to clergy and really the community in general. But we definitely have a lot of clergy who we support.
Yeah. I think it's helpful for folks to hear that because one of the things that I want to make really abundantly clear from this conversation is this is something we all can benefit from. I think folks sometimes go, well, this is for the person who has it worse. And I'm not saying that you have to be in therapy all day, every day, dear listener, but what I like about Samaricare is that whatever the thing is in your life, and you have a thing. I don't know what your thing is, but you have one. Samaricare exists to be able to help kind of meet you in that and help you go to whatever the other side of that means to you. And there's just a lot of freedom, I feel, for folks who may be looking into this that I want them to see that there's so many different ways that you can get the kind of support that you might feel like you need. Um, I also want to ask about one of the things that I think is important in this conversation on kind of the intersection of mental health and the church is the ways in which you see your faith lived out by sitting in these sacred spaces with folks. Because I think
Mhm.
it's one thing to talk about the lack of adversarial relationship, but I also think it's important to just emphasize like what you do every day is very holy work. How do you see as a believer
Mhm.
how do you connect what your faith is to the kind of work you do every day?
Mm. Yeah, really, really good question. Interesting question. I do feel it is sacred and holy work. Those would have been words I would have used because people are coming in and being very open and vulnerable and trusting that the it's a safe place to have the healing, that they need, and it needs to go through a valley in some ways to get there, and to have someone to ask questions and to be alongside um, is sacred. And there's a transformation that happens, that can happen and does happen. And it's a privilege to be there because it is the person's being very vulnerable um, and open about things that they might not have talked to anybody else about in their life that they're sharing to get out to try to process and to try to heal and to move forward from. So, like I was mentioning before, I do have a specialized call to
Mm-hmm.
Samaracare. So, a person, if they're an ordained pastor in most denominations, you could be, in mine happens to be Lutheran, but you could be you could be a professor, actually. You could be a chaplain in a hospital. You could be a chaplain in, for the Army, for example, and you'd have a specialized call. You could be a pastoral counselor, which would be more in the category that I would have. And you maintain your ordination and you have that as your setting versus a sort of a traditional congregational setting. So I very much do see it as a ministry and the
Mm-hmm.
impact that I see in the changed lives and the people that I directly serve. And as the leader of the organization now, when I see my colleagues and hear what's going on and see the impact that over all of these different people, how they're really helping people heal and grow, is really gratifying and incredible. And I feel it as an extension of, congregations like Good Shepherd, where we're able to spend that time with people in that way and give that attention week after week often, that just wouldn't be possible in a congregation, but we're an extension. We have, special training in that and so forth. And it's very much a ministry to what we're doing and, feel it as a partnership with local congregations for sure. So thanks for Good
Yeah.
Shepherd's support.
Yeah, I mean, what I hope too that if you're part of a different church and you're listening to this, that you can reach out to Samaricare to understand what partnering with them would look like. Because what I feel like is we've benefited exactly as Michael just described. There's we have the space, and it's connected to a lot of broader conversations we're having at Good Shepherd right now. But you mentioned the Lutheran background. It is a very Lutheran idea to talk about the priesthood of all believers, and therefore
Mhm,
to talk about the sacredness of the all of the kinds of work we do. And I
mhm,
think it's a danger that sometimes folks fall into of waiting for the pastor to do it in order to make it official, or assuming that it has to be from the church and programmatically in order to count.
mhm,
And the benefits, just as a testimonial or what have you, the benefits of my own mental health care has fueled so much of my discipleship. Taking the time to sit with a professional has done so much to allow me to do that kind of slow walk towards holiness and to find the ways in which I was blind to, didn't have the words for, or was in many cases for me personally, actively ignoring how there's parts of my life that were getting in the way of my own discipleship. And if discipleship's the goal, which I'm pretty sure it is, stuff that What's America does every day can be beneficial to so many people. Where I want to kind of land the plane here, I know there's an opportunity coming up in May for folks to get
mhm,
more connected to Samaricare. Can you help people understand what that is, why folks should jump in, and then
mhm.
obviously anything that Michael and I talked about today, ways to get more involved, resources specifically about grief groups at Good Shepherd. All of that's in the show notes wherever you're listening or watching. So do make sure that you click there, because if you just go, man, that was a nice conversation between two people who didn't know each other super well, you kind of miss the point. I want to make sure you guys get involved in whatever way makes most sense for you. But what's coming up in May that folks can get signed up for?
Yeah, so a big part of what we do is we have a fee subsidy program. So we want to serve all people. Some have insurance, some don't, like I was saying earlier. So we
Mm-hmm.
raise money from individual donors, from congregations, partnerships like with Good Shepherd and others to have resources to be able to help people come in for counseling, right? So we have a May 8th event. The Women in Touch group is is sponsoring the event, and it's Imagine Stronger. And we're going to be having a breakfast. All are welcome. And the idea there is there'll be a speaker and there'll be a program. There'll be a chance to meet other people and talk and have a great time together. And then, part of the goal is networking, meeting each other and all that. And then it's also to raise funds for our fee subsidy. It's called Mental Health Access Program. So we're super excited about that. We did the event there last year and it was a huge success. And we look forward to doing it again this year. And hopefully, many of the listeners can join us on May 8th.
Yeah. It's, whatever breakfast plans you had for May 8th probably weren't going to do as much good to society as going to have breakfast and supporting out the folks at Samaracare so that they can support other folks in our community. Because I think as trite as that might sound to people, what I just said, what I do hope you pay attention to is the ways in which all of us, no matter what stage of life you're in, no matter what season of life you're in, we have the opportunity to support and be for our neighbors, to use language like we like to use at Good Shepherd, by supporting organizations like Samaracare, by serving with folks like Samaracare. So, Michael, I really appreciate the time, the ministry. Folks can get connected, like I said, using any of the links in the show notes. But last word to you, if someone's listening to this podcast and they're like, hey, I think I could benefit from these services, like how would you encourage them to take, like what their next step would be?
The easy next step would be to check out our website. It's SamaricareCounseling.org. A lot of good resources on there, even some mental health screening types of things that are free, and you can kind of get an idea. Hey, I'm feeling down, and you can go through some questions and get kind of some feedback on just a high level, like, wow, you might want to check this out, or so there's some articles, some screenings, ways to contact us to explore counseling or other services or other ministries here. So that would be kind of the easiest. Talking to people that, in the community who have gone here. A lot of our people that end up coming here come from family and friends and congregations who they say, hey, you might want to talk to somebody over at Samaracare. So that's kind of the easiest way I can think of to connect.
That's great. Yeah. To offer a shameless plug to it, I would encourage you to go there because whatever you're going to read there is more factual and therefore more helpful than what you're watching on TikTok, dear listener. So do make sure that you check them out. Michael, thank you so much for the time. Thank you everybody for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
That sounds good. Thanks, Ross.
Thank you for listening to the Encounter Faith podcast. This podcast is a service of G. Shep Productions from Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Naperville, Illinois. All rights reserved. If you're in the area, we'd love to meet you on a Sunday morning at our 9 a.m. or 10:45 services. At Good Shepherd, we are inviting everyone to walk together in the calling of Christ for a life of eternal impact. This podcast is produced and hosted by me, Ross Cochran, and our theme song is Wake the Earth by 1111 Worship. Thank you for listening. We'll talk again soon.